Let's have a discussion about null check in Salesforce flows, folks. Null check has been a popular topic in coding and low coding for ages. It's a very important point that you should be looking for when you're developing code or low code. Now, when should we be checking for the null value? And when is it okay not to check? Is it really an anti-pattern, or is it okay to do it whenever it's necessary? So those are the things we're going to discuss in this video. Without further ado, let's dive into the topic. So what does a null check issue look like in the flow canvas? It looks exactly like this. Look, there's actually a create records element here. And I ran the debug, and in the debug, it says it failed to create the record. And the reason for that is a required field is missing. And in this case, the required field is the lookup. Like this is a junction object, opportunity contact role, right? And for the opportunity contact role to be created, it has to have two lookups, one to the opportunity, the other one to the contact. You can't leave those blank. So if either one of those are blank, or if they are both blank, then when you go to create, your flow is going to fail. So this is where you have to check your nulls. Now let's go through this in detail. What does this flow do? So this is an auto launch flow that receives a record ID as input, and that's meant for the opportunity, right? And I'm getting the opportunity, and once I get the opportunity, I'm going to get the most recent contact, the most recently updated contact under the same account. So I'm going up to the account on the opportunity, and then looking for the most recently updated contact here under that account. And I'm going to use that contact to create an opportunity contact role. So here I'm assigning the opportunity ID, which is the input to this flow. And I'm using the contact ID from my get contact step, get most recent contact step, and I'm assigning the role decision maker to this. Now there is another potential problem here. I have to check whether this opportunity contact role exists, because you can't really create a duplicate here either. That's another problem, right? You know, we're not even going to get into that today, but in the end, I have to make sure that my get steps over here have values in them. You know, they successfully find records. Now, in this case, what happens is I'm passing an opportunity ID here, and that opportunity here is assigned to an account called test account. And under the test account, I don't really have any contacts. So it is not going to find a contact in the get step. This flow is not going to find any contact. Once you go into thinking, I need to find the most recently updated contact, sometimes you forget about all the scenarios. You don't really think about whether there is going to be a contact under there or not, and you need to actually check for that. So what happens here is the opportunity record is found, successfully found the records. And then here under the get most recent contact, we didn't find any records. So in other words, this get records produced a null, which we need to check for. But then when we go to create records, referencing this contact ID, which is a value null here, we are going to experience this fault. And we need to check for that. I mean, you don't really experience a fault like in all scenarios. If this lookup was not a required lookup, you wouldn't really see an error message here. The lookup will not be populated. It will be assigned a null value, meaning there won't be any value in the lookup. But if it's not a master detail, if it's not a required lookup, you're not going to see a fault here. Again, when you're getting all records, let's say we want to get all the contacts here under the opportunity, and then we're getting a collection, and we want to loop through that collection. If that collection is null, when we go to loop, it's not going to loop at all. It's not going to iterate at all, but that's not going to necessarily yield a fault. So I can't really say not checking for null is an n-type pattern in all cases, like in all scenarios, because, you know, it's often not a problem, right? But in this case, we have to check for null. So how do we do that? So the way we do that is, now here in the get opportunity step, we don't really need to check for null here, whether we got the opportunity or not, because we are actually passing, if we set this thing up correctly, if this is deployed correctly in our org, like most probably this auto launch flow is going to be a subflow to another flow, and we're going to make sure that we're passing a valid opportunity ID to this flow. In that scenario, it's okay if we don't check for null here, but we could check for null here, but it's very important that we check for null over here. So that we will do via a decision. Is contact null. It's a good idea to use a question in your decision labels here. And you can say yes, null. And in which case the criteria will be get most recent contact from get most recent contact. And you can actually click out here. You don't really have to point to the ID. And then you say is null true. Then that is the null scenario, and the default outcome would be not null, right? So now we're checking for this scenario, and the only time we want to create the opportunity contact role is when the contact is not null. So this one will need to be connected to the end. Obviously, we could have different scenarios that we want to run when that happens, but, you know, the least we can do is bypass the create step over here. And under the create step over here, it's a good idea to first do a get and check whether that opportunity contact role combination already exists or not, because you're going to experience another fault if it exists and you're trying to create another one on top of it. So that's how you check for null in your Salesforce flows, folks.